All right, we're going to do a couple different things today. We're going to go over Chapter 7 and look at the shape up for Chapter 7. And I've also got, if there's time, we'll at least get into looking at a bit bucket exercise as well. So I'm on page 239. Let me just tell you, and if this affects you, you may have been told already, you may not have been told already. There are people who walk around this institution to make sure that you are in compliance. What does that mean? Means, for example, you can't wear tennis shoes here. You can't wear white socks. Your hair isn't supposed to be covering your ears. It's things like that. All right? When people are observed to be out of compliance, if you walk by, for example, Ms. Bruggeman, she may tell you that. That's part of her job. But if she doesn't get a chance to see you, of course, she stops me and has me come into her office and then talks to me about it. So if you have any questions, please go out online and take a look in the course catalog, because in the catalog in there they should have, it should have all the different restrictions that are in there. I know most of you who are in here, many of you in here, that Saturday before classes started, you were next door when Mr. Corrigan was in there, and he was kind of giving you the lowdown, so to speak, of how everything was supposed to be. There were two of those, and everyone who's in here should have attended one of those or the other. I don't want to be a hard guy. I don't have any choice. All right? I mean, I have to abide by the same rules. All right? Okay, so let's start on Chapter 7 again, page 239. What this chapter is, in some ways, is it's an extension of what we covered earlier in the book, because the first part of the chapter will talk about ordered lists, unordered lists, description lists, etc. We went over that already. The next part of the chapter will talk about hyperlinks. We've gone over that already. But there will be things that will be added that we have not yet talked about. All right. Then when we get done with that, we go into how to create navigation menus. That's about the last 6 or so pages, 10 or so pages of the chapter. And if you look here, where is it? Do I have it here? Oh, I did. All right. But when we get to that point, I just wanted to show you. Let's see. Come on. This is what we're building for the shape up thing. No, that isn't it. That's it. So you'll notice, if you look here, we now have a menu here. The active component in here is blackened as far as its text. Whatever we highlight gets a different color highlight. And for stress relief and for diets, you'll notice that both of those, that's what's called a two-tiered menu. All right? So that's what we're going to be getting into again in this particular chapter. All right. So the first thing that's in there is they talk about unordered lists. You know this already. An unordered list, the idea behind an unordered list is there is no order to it. So for instance, if you were giving someone instructions on how to get from point A to point B, you wouldn't use an unordered list. Does that make sense? All right. We've talked about this, I think, in an earlier exercise where we did like a recipe. That would be in an ordered list as well. All right. Now, if I was listing all the people in my family and I wanted to do it based on age, I'd want to do it in an ordered list. If I just wanted to list everyone in my family and I didn't care, about ages, or I just wanted to list them all, that could be in an unordered list. All right. So unordered lists, just like ordered lists, all right, they consist of LIs or list items. Now, one thing we did not really talk about in the last chapter, but it's worth at least mentioning this to you, is what you put in this list item. If you look on the example here, we've just basically been putting, a phrase or a very simple one-line sentence, but you can put anything you want in there. In an unordered list, you can put in paragraphs, you can put in images, you can put in basically anything you want to or need to put in. Not only that, you can put a list inside of a list. Now, Maybe I've made this analogy to you before, maybe I have not. I don't know. But I remember it was around 4th grade or so. For the first time, we had to write a book report. And the teacher wanted us to write an outline. You know, like a Roman numeral 1, ABC, all that other good stuff. You can do that in here, and you can do that using a combination of ordered lists and unordered lists. All right, so that's what they're going to talk about in the chapter. So if you notice, it is an ordered list, but it has paragraphs in it. All right, is that the best way to do it? I don't know. Is that the only way to do it? Heck no. There are always other ways of doing the same thing. Again, by default, when you work with an unordered list, the bullets display as bullets. Not that hard to realize. All right. But whatever you put in there, what you get by default is you get a circle that's colored in. Okay? But you can also have a square that's colored in, and you can have a circle that's not colored in. And if you don't like any of those, you can put in your own thing. All right? But what basically is in charge of that is something that's called list style type. And we should see that, I believe, on the next page. All right, when they start to talk about how you can code these different things, we're going to see it. Just you have to take my word for it. Again, ordered lists have some order to them. All right, and a couple things about ordered lists. First thing, everybody see the yellow right there? Well, what do we have here? We've got an ordered list. That is a complete ordered list right there with 3 elements in there. Then we've got an H2 tag, but we want to continue with the ordered list. If you didn't put start equal 4, then rather than this looking like 1, 2, 3, 4, it would start over again at 1. That makes sense? You can start this at anything you want. If you wanted to start it at 1,000, you could. I believe you can even start it at negative numbers if you really want to do that. Never tried. I know I've never seen the reason to do that. Again, I mentioned this before that you can have a list within a list. All right. So you'll notice here we've got an unordered list in our list items. Then we've got an ordered list. Then we've got another list item that's got another ordered list in it. So you can see how this looks. All right. Again, it should be pretty intuitive to you. This is not like what I would call real hard. But the point is, take a look at it because anything that's in there is fair game to put on your next hands-on test. All right. All right, then there's the description list. Now, I don't use these hardly ever. They're a little bit more complex because rather than having just like an OL with LIs or an UL with LIs, they're a DL with DTs with DDs. All right? The DL means definition list, the DT means definition term, and the DD is the actual definition. And the way those typically print out is like this. I think there are better ways to do it than that, but oftentimes you'll see this, you know, for example, at the end of a book, they might have a glossary, and you sometimes will see it set up like that. I would not put definition lists on a test. Again, there's nothing wrong with them. I just wouldn't put them on there. All right? So moving up to page 248, how to format lists. First thing, as it says, how to change the bullets in an unordered list. Well, I already told you that. List, style, type. This is what you get. Those are the 4 choices you have for list, style, type. Disk, which is that solid circle that I showed you. Circle, which is the circle that's not filled in. Square, and none. All right? So if you decide you're going to see this in just a bit, quite often you'll have an unordered list that you use to create your menu structure. And then you'll almost always set the list style type to none. Now, if you don't like that, you can put in your own. So they've got an example here. Sometimes something would really, like, wow. So I looked at that and I thought, well, how would you do this, etc. And do I have it here? So I went on, they have stars. So I just literally looked for a star thumbnail out on Google Images. And I found that one. But you'll notice it's 600 by 600. That would be a pretty big star on a page. So what I did was I went out and I saved it. I have it. I saved it into my images like this. Now, you may know about this, what I'm about to show you. You may not know. You might not even care. But a lot of times you've got something like this. You've got an image, and it's bigger than you need. You can go out to a site that's called makeathumbnail.com. That's what I did. And I told it to choose that image and just make me a 100 by 100 thumbnail. All right? And when it does that, what it does is it literally makes the file for you and it throws it out on the internet. All right? So I have now this right here. And you say, well, what's different? It's 100 by 100 as opposed to 600 by 600. All right? Just something for you to keep in mind. You may never need to use anything like that. All right? But if you do, notice how we do it. You don't say list style type. You say list style image, then you give it the URL. This does not have to be an image that you've got saved on your system either. You can literally put in there where it says URL in double quotes. If you wanted to or needed to, you could put an actual URL in there. You could grab something from out on the internet if for some reason you wanted to or needed to do that. So as it says, you can change the bullet that's displayed for an unordered list by using the list style property. All right. All right. Same kind of thing, but with numbering. Notice these are the 6 possibilities you have. You get decimal by default. So you can go in there and change list style type for an OL to any of these. All right. The ones that are used probably the most often are decimal, lower alpha, and lower Roman. But you might have a reason to use any or all of them. All right. So they show you how you can set something like that up in here. All right. And notice they've got lowercase letters. And that's because they did this. Again, you're to the point now where you should all realize if you're going to make that change, you're going to make that change in the CSS file. Not only that, if you've got several ordered lists and you only want to change one of them, you're going to take that ordered list and you're going to give it an ID, right? I mean, you could give it a class if you wanted to change several of them. So again, you can change the numbering system. The default, as mentioned, is decimal. All right. How to change the alignment of list items. Guess what? We have talked about this before. We've talked about how to turn off margin, how to turn off padding. All right. By default, what they're talking about here is notice what they've done. All right. So they've turned off the margin and they've turned off the padding. What does that mean? That means those dots are pushed all the way over there. All right. As opposed to there were a couple, I don't know what page that was, a couple pages previously, I think it was. I don't remember. But somewhere in here they showed it, and where that's not done. So again, you can go into your HTML and have different kinds of effects. All right. I don't want to sit and read this to you, but you should be by now be understanding the use of margins and the use of padding. All right. And all the different stuff that it can do for effects that you can add, in this case, to ordered or unordered lists. Notice here, the techniques work best if you specify them using ems. Again, because that is a relative unit as opposed to an absolute unit. All right, hyperlinks. How to link to another page. We already know that. What you may not know when you look in here is the last 2 things that are in there. That is Tabindex and Access Key. Tabindex, you can always tell how long someone's been working with computers. I don't know if you've ever noticed this, but Microsoft, for example, typically on the top of its screen, if you bring up Microsoft Word or whatever, it'll give you, at the very top, you'll get a menu. Okay, underneath that menu, you'll get a bunch of toolbar options. All right, but you'll also have where you can do Alt something or Control something or whatever. Now Microsoft's actually changing. They're really going away from using menus. You notice that, like with the newer versions of Word and the like, they're trying to get everybody so that you understand pictures. All right, but the point is, there's typically different ways that you can maneuver around the system. One way, and you'll learn about this when we get into forms a little bit more, and you'll learn about this next semester in C#, is to use what's called a tab index. By default, when you stick stuff on a page, if you were to hit the tab key, you go from whatever you put to whatever you put. You do an order of the way you put it on the screen. That may not be the order that you want it. So you can go in and you can set the tab index. Why would you want to do that? Well, let's say that I set myself up a very simple form. And the form is supposed to have first name, last name, email address, and comments. And for whatever reason, I do it kind of in reverse order. So I've got comments, and I've got a text area here. Don't worry about what that is. I've got something that says email, and I've got a text box there. I've got last name, and I've got a text box there, and I've got first name, and I've got a text box there. And then I've got a button down here that says, like, submit. All right. By default, when I run this, what usually will happen is my cursor will be right in there, because that's the first thing that I put in. You say, well, what about comments? You don't even worry about these labels. The point is, if I want to make sure that my cursor is here when I start, and when I hit tab, it goes to here, then to here, then to here, I can set that tab index. All right. Typically, you set the tab index to 0 for the first field, the one that you want to be the one that's highlighted when you start the application up. There's also access key. And again, even if you don't think so, you probably know what those are. For instance, on a lot of software application packages, if you do like a Control-X, it'll exit from the application. That's an access key. If you want to print, you do a Control-P. Sometimes it's Alt something, sometimes it's Control something. So if you want to be able to set those yourselves, you can do that using an access key. All right. Just like we saw earlier with some of the stuff we've been working with, again, those anchor tags can have a title, which is like a tooltip. All right, so if the person puts their mouse over it, it should tell them where they're going to go. And we talked about this before. When you set this kind of thing up, you should never have a hyperlink that says, like, click here. The person should always know, based on what's underlined, where they're going to be going. Okay. And they show 3 different examples here. This first one is what you typically would look at, just a regular hyperlink. But if you want to, as they show in the second example here, you can put an image in there. If you're going to do that, you should always make sure it's an image people can understand. All right. I mean, that's not a great one or a terrible one, but you have all seen that probably for a shopping cart, just the cart itself. And people get stuff like that. But if you've got something for your site that other people might look at and not understand what it is, you probably don't want to set it up with an image. Or at a minimum, if you're going to do that, you want to add a title to it. So if they put their mouse over it, they have some kind of an idea of what it is. All right. Here's some accessibility guidelines. Okay. Now, when they say accessibility guidelines, they're saying how to make it easier for others. And also, typically, this at least could help, when search engines are looking at your page. So, if the text for a link is to be short, code the title attribute to clarify where the link is going. Again, you and I might know that TOC is table of contents. Other people may or may not. All right. You should also code a title attribute if the link includes an image with no text. So again, And I mentioned the rest of the ones in there to you already. All right, how to format links. We have talked about this already. These again are called the CSS, bless you, pseudo classes. You'll notice there are 5 of them. The link, as it says, is a link that hasn't been visited yet. You know this already, that by default, it's blue. Visited is one that has been visited. By default, it's purple. Hover, as it says, all right, it's when your mouse is over it. You haven't done anything yet, but your mouse is over it. Focus is an element that currently has the focus, and active, as it says, is currently active. Typically with active, it's like you pushed it down, but you haven't let go of the mouse. You can set any or all of these. All right. The text decoration we've looked at already. You have set text decoration to none. You know what that does. All right. We've already looked at that. Border style, as it says, to remove the border from an image link. You may or may not even have noticed it, but I believe by default all images have a 1 pixel border around them. You know, you may find that irritating to see that on your page, so you can remove it. We talked about this a little bit earlier, but let's just mention it again, and that is, as the author says here, apply the same formatting to hover and focus. That way, as it says, the formatting is the same whether you hover the mouse over the link or you use the keyboard to tab over something. How to use a link to open a new browser window. I believe we've talked about this. Again, target equal blank. I mentioned to you in an earlier class about what's considered good netiquette. In other words, if you're going to be going from your site to another site, right there it says just go to the HTML testing site. That should be in a target equal blank so it opens up in a new page. If you don't do that, you could be leaving the person who clicks it with the wrong impression that that's part of your site, which it's not. All right. It says whether your browser opens in a new window or a new tab depends on your browser settings. If you don't know the difference, if I click there, what is that? That's a new tab. If I click down here and I say Google Chrome, that's a new window. All right. Okay. How to create and link to placeholders. I wish, personally, they'd used a different name for this. Why? Because when we get into chapter, I think it's 11, we'll be talking about forms. Placeholder means something else in there. But for whatever reason, they're using it in here right now. Okay? Now, have you ever been on a web page where it's a fairly long page and you might get down to the bottom of it and it's got a little hyperlink that says something like go to top or just top, where you could jump back up? All right? That's what they're talking about in here. Okay? And in order to do that, the good news is the code to do it is not hard. All right? So they give you an example here on this page. There's a return to top. Now that's kind of a silly example unless there's a bunch more stuff up there. Because if you're right here, if that's the whole page, really isn't a top to go to. But again, there are things out there that you may or may not have heard of. One thing that's actually very popular today is what's called a spa. No, I don't mean a health spa. But when I say a spa, it's a single page application where somebody builds the entire site that it's on one page. And you can just keep scrolling down and down and down. A lot of times in those spa type of applications, you'll see a go to top. You can jump anywhere you want on a page. All right? And in order to do that, what you basically have to do is you have to go in there and you have to set up links. So notice it says there, href, return to top. All right? And I'm going to let you read through the section here. But again, you can go and you can jump to a different part on your page. Not only that, it is totally legitimate for you to jump to a different part of your website. So you can jump right from one page in your website to another page in your website. Typically, you can't jump to the middle of someone else's website unless they also have something set up for you to do that and you know what it is. All right. So they go through the steps here on the bottom of page 261. All right. Now, how to link to a media file. This is about as simple as it gets. Chapter 12 of this book is all on media files, just so you know. That's what the whole thing is on. But just for now, all right, they give you a little, I don't know if you call it an intro or whatever, but if you look right here, what does this do? Ahref, notice it's a PDF. You're not opening up a website, you're opening up a PDF from a hyperlink. You let it know that the application is this, the target is blank, and where it says read the instructor summary, this supposes that you have a folder called documents, and inside of that folder you've got something called instructor summary. All right, this is just an example. So you'd have that on your web page, you click it and it would open up, you know, a PDF. Now, other things in here, WAV files, MP3s, MP4s, SWIFT files. SWIFTs, in many ways, shockwaves, they're not as used as they used to be. All right, I don't mean that they're gone, they're not. But again, we're going to look at this stuff in much more breadth and depth and breadth of coverage in Chapter 12. Right. You can create email, phone, and Skype links. We've talked about the email one already with the Mail To. I've had problems using the Mail To. But a lot of times, you know, this is one place where you might have, you know, click here to send me an email, and you might take me and you might give that a Mail To. Tom might do that, for example, all right, on his Leave Me at Home website. You can also, and I'm sure you've all seen these, a link that calls a phone number. You've all been on your phone where you've got a link on there and you click it and it'll make the call for you. All right. It's amazing. You can sort of tell how people are in that it's like when I constantly Google stuff on my phone, but I never use the voice activated stuff. All right. My wife never Googles anything. You know, she's in the car. Okay, Google, and I just frickin' hate that. I think that's why she does it, because she knows I hate it. All right. Not only can you open up email or phone, if the person has Skype, you can open up a Skype between two people. Skype session, I guess you'd call it. All right. Now, that right there is, you know, there was some of the stuff in there was review. Some of the stuff that was in there was new. But again, the last 10 pages or so of this chapter, starting here on page 266, this is creating navigation menus. All right. Now, they show, the first example they show right here is this one. You might say, that's really ugly. All right. But the thing to take away from this is these are all just hyperlinks. And what they've done with the hyperlinks is they put them in boxes and done some work with colors on them so they look more like buttons. And I'm not saying that they really look like buttons, but they're starting to show you that. They wanted them to look more like buttons. They could have made all of them a grayish color, you know, with black text, typically what you see for buttons. They could have rounded them. They could have done a bunch of stuff. But they're just showing you this. So, again, on how to create this on 266, as they mentioned, it shows you how to create a vertical navigation menu. Most menus you see today are horizontal across. It wasn't that long ago that most menus were vertical. It may change again in the future. Who knows? All right. And it says the first thing to notice when you do this, in fact, they didn't even use a bunch of I guess they did, but they're inside of what? They're inside of an unordered list. So the first thing they've done is they've removed the list style type property by setting it equal to none. All right. Then, as it says, they placed a border around each one of these list items, and they set the width of each one to 200 pixels. And it says the most critical CSS is for the A elements. The display property of these is set to block. And what that does, it sounds real simple, but by setting that to block, that means you don't have to click on the words. You can click anywhere in the box. All right, which is a little bit nicer. You want to always make the user's experience as painless as possible, for lack of better words. All right. It says to let users know what page they're on, it's also a good practice to highlight the current link, as you can see right there. All right, and again, you might look at that and say that's just really a bad example. Maybe you'd never do that. But the point is, if you wanted to, you could. All right. Not only that, it may be that on a web page, each one of these is going to a different website. And maybe you'd want to set it up like that. All right. You know, again, let's say that I had some kind of a car place, and I guaranteed the lowest price in town. And let's just say, for the sake of argument, there were 4 other dealers in town. I could say, check out my competition, and I could have a link to each one of their sites. All right. And you can go through and take a look. It's pretty much what I just told you. Notice they've added some padding too on here. All right. So as it says, when you're working with a vertical navigation list, it's best coded as a series of anchor elements within LI tags of an unordered list. Guess what? It's pretty much the same way for a horizontal menu as well. So that's what they show next on 267 and 268. This is really the first time we've looked at something like this. Now, you know, big difference between these visual-wise. So which one would you want to use? You know, again, it depends on a lot of things. If you're doing your job for somebody, you ask them. And they may come back and say they want this, and you may think, man, that's ugly. But if that's what they want, that's what you give them. All right? But again, what you'll notice when you start going through in here, it's pretty similar to what they showed before. Difference being this line right there. The display is now inline. Remember, display block means put each one of them on their own line and put a blank line in between them. Display inline means keep it on the same line. Many of you either knew or you went online and looked because on the Leave Me at Home site, you already had a very nice horizontal menu. For those of you who did not, you will do that for your next test. So if that confuses you, go take a look at the example that's here on 268 and 269. All right. So they show you the two of them, and then they show you here's the CSS for the first one, here's the CSS for the second one. All right. Now we talk about tiers. And guess what? You already know what this is. Because I mentioned to you before putting, for example, an unordered list inside of an unordered list. And that's basically what you get, whether it's 2-tier or 3-tier. That's pretty much what you're doing. So as the author says here, in a multi-tiered menu, each item bar can contain a submenu with additional items. Now remember, when you do this and you set up something like this, by default, this isn't going to go anywhere until you add links and make it go somewhere. All right? And depending on how you want to use the CSS, you can literally have it go below. You can have it go above. But in this case, that's where I would put it, would be below or above. I wouldn't put it to the right. It may be confusing for people. Of course, if you went to the left, you'd be covering up what was there. You know, But if you do want to go to the left, you could literally shove that over and then put it on the left. So there's a lot of different ways this can be set up. And again, I mentioned to you last week that the prediction is within 5 years, and it's happening now, that 40 to 50% of all web people are going to be independent designers. So, you know, Chris gets a job and he's working for somebody. What do you want? Sometimes they'll go, I don't know what I want. Just show me and I'll tell you, you know, if that's what I want or not. Other times they'll have an idea of what they want and how they want it set up. So again, notice class is equal to last item. And when you take a look at you'll notice that much of the CSS, when you go through this, gets more complex. All right. The good news is, if you know, I mentioned this to you, but I'm going to say it again. I put out on the system, and if for some reason you can't find it, if you don't know this already, if you go out to Muroc.com, it's a Muroc book, and you find our textbook, there it is, and you click on it, and it's thinking about, all right, learn more, I don't know. But what you can do when you go through this is you can get, under free downloads, you can get all the code. So if you want to go and download the code and play with it, you're able to do that. All right, and the last thing that they really talk about on 272, 273, 274, and 275 is a 3-tier navigation menu. All right, so there's tier 1, there's tier 2, and there's tier 3. All right, now some people will tell you that if you're going to do this, okay, they might use, for example, let's just assume for a second that their colors are blue and red. All right, so red text. They may, you know, there are some places that when they have another level, like the second level, instead of making it blue and red, it might be red and blue. And then they go back to blue and red here. Again, I don't know if you agree with this or don't agree with this. I find that a little hard to view. First of all, I don't like that blue anyway. All right, but everybody's different. And finally, the last thing they do then on 274 and on 275 is they give you the CSS for this. All right. And that didn't take long. All right. So it's a little early, but it's 8:46. Let's come back at 9 o'clock and we will look at the shape up for this chapter.